Surrounded by farmland, today Langham Airfield is a mere shadow of its former self. Stories of wartime heroism are locked away in the few buildings that remain. Skylarks fill the air where once Beaufighters and Wellingtons disappeared into the clouds, heavy with their payloads making for Nazi Germany. Two proud sisters recall their father's time on the base.
My dad was a pilot at RAF Langham and flew Wellington bombers.
Dad was as a model maker as a teenager. He loved making models out of balsa wood and tissue paper. He'd always wanted to be a pilot, and he was lucky enough to be billeted back home. They allowed him to stay at his house, and a lot of the crew would use it as a home base. There was Christmas parties, photographs of probably a dozen of 612 raising glasses at the table, just having a bit of fun away from flying.
My dad would set off for missions round about 7 o'clock at night. He would go with his crew in his Wellington and he would fly as low as he could round the house without getting into trouble, so that my grandmother would always know when he'd left, because presumably it was the only plane that did fly round the house.
In early 1945, Flight Lieutenant Jeff Rounce and his crew took off on a routine reconnaissance mission. What happened that night was to become the defining moment in Jeff's flying career.
There was a lot of flak, and it was quite a dangerous mission. He had a ley light below the plane, so with this spotlight he could pinpoint exactly what it was in the sea. He destroyed 2 E-boats, and wishing to complete his mission, he went round again and let the depth charges go and destroyed the rest.
Jeff's gallantry earned him the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross. However, unaware of his achievement, all that was on his mind after the battle was to get back home with one pressing act of duty to perform for his mother.
I can just imagine her lying in bed waiting to hear this low bomber plane coming over the chimney pots, and then she could go to sleep and she knew that he was safely home.
Langham hadn't always witnessed such hectic activity. One local resident remembers the village in quieter times.
I was born in Langham in the Bluebell in 1923. In 1939, when the war broke out, I was in the wages office for Murphy Radio, and they made radios. And I think that was important. It was quite secret, really. I put down for the WAFs, but the manager that I worked for said that he tried to get me reserved occupation.
When the airfield upgraded in 1944, the village suddenly had to accommodate a population of over 2,000. For local girls like Enid, life became more exciting.
We had airmen mostly at Langham, and of course they would go to the local dances. One was a popular one, was at Stifky every Saturday night, and I used to go to that. So there were plenty of people to dance with, and it was great fun, really. But we couldn't go over the aerodrome at that time. The road between Langham and Cockthorpe was cut off. If you walked down there, they would say, "Who comes here, friend or foe?" And you used to say friend, and they would say advance friend and be recognised. And we loved to do that.
In April 1944, squadrons from the Royal Australian and New Zealand Air Forces, the Anzacs, were stationed at Langham to form a strike wing of Beaufighter aircraft. They were engaged on numerous secret missions to sink enemy shipping off the Dutch coast.
When we arrived, I remember the squadron leader said, 24 pilots, Australian pilots, 24 English. I'll give you 3 weeks to crew up, and if you haven't done so by then, I'll do it for you. Well, Lloyd Farr and I, we were both Christians, and we were the only ones who had that link, and so it seemed natural that we should be crewing. I did 49 trips with him. Well, the one that was most shattering to me was an attack by combined squadrons on ships in Den Helder Harbour. As we were going in, we were hit, and the shell went between my legs, burst behind, and set, first of all, the very cartridges on fire, and then the interior. And I just prayed, "It's all yours, God." I remember that, saying that very clearly, as I faced what seemed to me certain death.
With a fire on board to contend with, no hydraulics to work the undercarriage, and the compass shot to pieces, they somehow limped back to the Norfolk coast. Landing was going to ultimately test their skills as airmen.
If we'd gone in too slowly, the nose would have gone in and we could have been killed immediately. And if you'd have gone too fast, we could have bounced off again. We didn't land on the runway. We landed on the grass. It was a very great sense of relief that I can remember coming to a stop. It wasn't serious. I just had flak in my legs where the shell had gone through.
It may not have amounted to much in Bert's mind, but to the higher ranks of the Air Force, the bravery of the mission didn't go unrecognized.
I heard the group captain over the phone saying, "This navigator should have a DFC." I remember him saying that. I could just hear it in the distance, and they always awarded me the Distinguished Flying Cross because of that event.
In the closing months of the war, further missions from the squadrons at Langham would have aided the Allies as they advanced into Europe to defeat the Germans. When the war was eventually won, Langham, like so many other airfields in Norfolk, was kept operational. In 1946, the Royal Netherlands Air Force and Navy took up residence. Holland had suffered badly under German occupation, and its servicemen lacked aircraft training. Langham was chosen as the ideal base for a school of technical training. Although spared the aftermath of hostilities in Holland, they unfortunately had to endure the severest English winter in living memory in 1947. Spring and the sight of Dutch tulip bulbs back home couldn't have come quick enough. The next chapter in the peacetime life of Langham Airfield came in 1951. The aircraft company Marshall of Cambridge relocated their civilian anti-aircraft cooperation unit. They provided a much-needed boost for local employment in the austere years that followed the war.
I applied and I was given the job as an aircraft handler, refueler. I was put in charge of looking after all ground equipment. The Mosquitoes were wheeled out, the Spitfires were all got out and prepared, and the vehicles. Put it like this, if it didn't fly, it was mine. If it had an engine on, I looked after it.
Among the ranks of Marshall's personnel was the celebrated pilot Veronica Volkas, who had been one of the small band of female pilots who operated the wartime Air Transport Auxiliary. Her presence on the base caused quite a stir.
Yeah, Veronica, she was a lovely woman. Well, she's a beautiful woman, you put it that way. She's blonde, and everyone liked her.
I was flying along straight and level when suddenly, zip, a meteor shot past me and wheeled away to starboard. I waggled my wings and saw that he was turning towards me. When he was quite close, I thought, this is where I give this bloke the surprise of his life. I pulled off my helmet and blew him a kiss.
She flew over 60-odd different types of aircraft. She flew jets, but I'm afraid that they wouldn't allow her to fly the Vampires, which is a great disappointment for her, because I'm sure she could handle it just as well.
In her memoirs, Veronica wrote of the feeling she had that Langham was haunted by the ghosts of the past. Today, it's not hard to imagine how right she was. There are many tales of selfless courage that should never be forgotten. The association with Langham Airfield, its village and people, made such a lasting impression on one Wellington gunner that his wish was to be brought back to Langham to be buried in the churchyard. Warrant Officer Peter Brewster's daughter Monica Kirkland regularly visits her father's last resting place, which she also shares with her mother.
He was always reminiscing about the times that he had here at Langham and in the Air Force. Whilst my father had a very long life, and he was very fortunate to be healthy for most of it, a lot of his friends did die flying missions out of Langham. Langham, it does have a lot of ghosts, and we do need to remember them.
It isn't a pleasant thing going in that you know it might be killed. I've known what it is to be afraid many times. Only about 15, 20 minutes sometimes, half an hour at the most, would it be battle. But after that is disappearing into the clouds and then make for home in clouds if you can. Glad to get back.
Dad talked about coming back to Langham and finding names that had been on the blackboard disappearing. So he would arrive back and the names of a crew had gone completely. And he said people didn't talk about it, but the names were not there for the next day.